Hi everyone, welcome to part 3 of talking about Halloween and the history. So far we have covered the history of Samhain, the history of Pomona, all the way through the Victorians. Now we're going to talk about the 20th century. That had some big changes within the 20th century here. So we're going to begin with the children. And of course, they took over the holiday in the beginning of the 20th century. It was a big, big thing. World War I had happened. It started in 1914. The country just took a big turn, and everything had to grow up, including all of our traditions. So this is when the adults, they quit going to the parties, but the children, they took over going to the parties. They continued. And they even took it into the streets. You can say the evil, that dark side of Halloween came back. So many pranks and vandalism started happening at that time as a part of the evil instead of the spirits that you saw in Samhain go around. Now it was the pranks and vandalism. So in the 1930s, in Queens, New York, 1,000 windows were smashed on Halloween night. And even some of the pranks caused people to die. People were killed. So it was getting way out of hand. By the 1920s, the adults started to make some changes. So in Anoka, Minnesota, so here's 1930s costumes, some more costumes I found. So here is Anoka, Minnesota. They threw the country's first civic Halloween parade, and it was an attempt to tame the children and get the vandalism off the streets. And it did help, but there were still a lot of pranks that went on, and a lot of kids, they did things such as building collages on top of houses, out of things from the yard, toilet papering houses. That still happened. Then, of course, we turn around and we hit World War II. World War II happened, and the kids again had to quit going to parties because it was frowned upon because it was a waste. You needed to do everything for the war effort. So the kids started working for the war effort, collecting scrap metal. And the many places canceled all their Halloween events. So after the war in the late 1940s and into the 1950s, Halloween parties resumed. So adults, they still tried to keep the vandals at bay, and they would offer prizes after the party for who got home on time. They would give like a time limit, like 30 minutes. Okay, get home by then. And if you're there to answer the phone, you get this prize. So that would keep them at bay. So during the 1970s and 80s, kids started, really vandalizing. In Detroit, there were thousands of buildings set on fire, and it became known as Devil's Night, which now when you watch the news, they call it Angel's Night. They're trying to do a shift in it from the 1970s, 80s, 90s. Now they're shifting to Angel's Night, trying to make a whole change there. Again, shifting Halloween. Which, of course, the pranks were happening on the 31st, which was Halloween. Now they were happening on the 30th, so that was another shift that was going on. And again, in the 1970s, there was rumors about razor blades being put in fruit and candy being poisoned. Parents had a big panic and had to take all their kids had to take candy to be x-rayed to make sure there wasn't anything in it. And as it turned out, when they investigated all this stuff, they found out it was a family member that had done it to their own niece, nephew, child. I don't know the specifics on that, but it was a family member that had done it. I recall at this time my dad had seen that I had a popcorn ball, a homemade popcorn ball, and he was yelling at me to throw it out. But I pleaded with him, and it's like, oh, but our neighbor made it, which she was someone who babysat me. I played with her kids. My brother played with her kids, and we knew them very, very well. And then he, of course, relented and said, yes, go ahead. And some of the changes, one of the big changes that's happened over this whole history of Halloween is we went from the ancient Celts fearing other worldly spirits to the modern people fearing each other. So that was a big shift in Halloween. So, but just so you know, there still are contemporary groups of witches, and they still hold Samhain rituals on Halloween. They still use the ancient symbols of firelight, prayer, and apples. And some churches are still fighting this, the ideas of Halloween, and they're making videos in haunted houses to spread their Christian messages against evil doings that people um, continue to do just in your daily life type things. Um, but the majority of people, they just look at it as fun. They don't even think in terms of pagan or witchcraft. They just want to go out and enjoy. And Americans, they spend 2.5 billion, if not more. What I had seen was 2.5 billion, but I'm sure it's a lot more on Halloween. And it's become the second biggest commercial holiday behind Christmas. Christmas is still number one. And almost all children go trick or treating. There's very few that I have heard or seen when I was growing up that did not go. So in more recent times, Halloween has shifted back to adults. You know, as adults, we celebrated Halloween as kids. We enjoyed the parties, we enjoyed the dressing up, and we kind of figure, why shouldn't we continue doing it? So now there are more adult parties and more shifts going back. So here's some pictures from the 1930s, the Devil's Night, 1970s and 80s, fires burning, razor blades and the fruit, and 1970s costumes. So right now, during our COVID-19 pandemic, we're all wearing these masks to stay safe and keep from spreading the virus. It's very similar, as I looked at this picture and remembered wearing these plastic masks. It's a very similar thing to wearing those when you're breathing through these masks that we're wearing now. It just brought back that memory to me. So I hope you've learned some fun facts about Halloween and how it's evolved over the past 3,000 years. Enjoy, and I hope you have a very safe Halloween, and hopefully can get out and do some trick-or-treating there, get some candy.